I am Thomas, and this is my story. The oil lamp on the low table had burned down to a stub, and still I could not sleep. My hands have always been a carpenter's hands before they were a disciple's hands, thick-knuckled, quick to test the strength of a beam before I trusted my weight to it. That is simply who I am. I do not believe a joint is sound because a man tells me it is sound. I press my thumb into the wood. I feel for the give. My father taught me that a builder who trusts blindly buries his family under the roof he built. I have never been ashamed of this. Until this week, I did not know it could feel like a wound. 8 days ago, I was not in the upper room when he came. I have gone over it 1,000 times since, turning the memory the way I used to turn a plank in my hands, looking for the flaw. Where had I been? Buying bread, I think, or simply walking, because the walls of that room had begun to close in on me like a tomb of our own making. 10 men breathing the stale air of fear, bolting the door each night against the Sanhedrin's guards, against the mob that had shouted for Barabbas and gotten its way. I needed the sky. I needed to walk where the dust of the street could remind me that the world still turned, even though my rabbi did not. I had watched him die. That is the thing none of the others understood in quite the way I did. Peter had fled and wept bitterly afterward, but he had fled before the end. John had stood at the foot of the cross with the women, close enough to hear his last words. But John has a gentleness in him that lets grief move through him like water through a net. I stood farther back, near the road, unable to come closer and unable to leave, and I watched the life go out of the only man I had ever fully given myself to. I watched the soldier's spear open his side. I watched blood and water run down and darken the stone. A man who has seen a friend die like that does not trust rumors easily. Grief had taught me that hope is the cruelest liar there is. So when I came back that evening and found the others shaking, faces bright with something between terror and joy, all talking over one another, "We have seen the Lord, Thomas. We have seen the Lord." Something in my chest went hard as cedar. "Peter," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it. "You also said you would never deny him. 3 times before the cock crowed, you denied him." He flinched. I was not proud of striking that wound, but I needed them to hear me, not just their own relief. "I am not doubting because I want to doubt," I told them, and this part was true, more true than my anger. I loved him too. God knows I loved him. I said it myself in Bethany, when the rest of you were afraid to go near Lazarus's tomb because the Judeans there wanted to stone him. I said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." I meant it. I would have died on that hill beside him gladly, if dying could have stopped what happened to him. "Then believe us," Matthew said quietly. "We are not lying to you, Thomas." "I don't think you are lying." And I didn't. I could see it in them. Some change had come over the room, a warmth that had not been there for 3 days. But warmth is not proof. A man can be lied to by his own longing as easily as by another man's tongue. I think you want it so much that grief has begun to look like him to you. I watched the nails go into his hands. I watched them drive the spear into his side. Until I put my own finger into the mark of the nails and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. The words felt like blasphemy even as I said them, and also like the only honest thing left in me. I was not demanding a miracle to entertain my curiosity. I was refusing to let my heart be broken twice. That night I lay awake, turning it over. Was I the fool of the 12, the one whose stubbornness would be remembered forever as a byword? Or was I simply the only one honest enough to say aloud what fear had taught the rest of them to swallow? I thought of my own name, twin. Twin to what, I sometimes wondered. Twin, perhaps, to a man of far greater faith, the other half of me that could not yet come into the light. I did not feel like a twin to anyone that night. I felt entirely, wretchedly alone, caught between the men who believed and the tomb I had seen sealed with my own eyes. 7 days passed like that. We kept the door bolted. Old habits of fear die slowly, even in joy, and I moved through the house like a man carrying a stone in his chest. I heard them pray. I heard them argue gently about what it meant, whether he would come again, what they should do now. I said little. I worked with my hands when I could find work, because a carpenter thinks better when his fingers are busy, and grief that has nowhere to go will rot a man from the inside if he lets it sit still too long. And under all of it, quietly, shamefully, I kept praying too. Not the confident prayers of the others. Mine were smaller and angrier and more honest than I liked. God, if you are what they say you have shown them to be, if my Lord truly lives, do not leave me outside the door of it. I would rather doubt honestly than believe a comfortable lie. But I would rather be wrong and know it than be right, and lose him twice. On the 8th day, the doors were shut again, just as before. I remember the sound of the bar sliding into place, remember the particular smell of that room. Lamp oil, bread, the sweat of frightened men who had not gone out in days, and underneath it all, faintly, the dust of Jerusalem's streets clinging to our robes. Evening light came thin and gold through the shutter cracks, laying stripes across the floor. I was sitting near the wall, half listening to Philip and Andrew, my mind somewhere else entirely, when the air in the room changed. I can describe it no better than that. There was no creak of the door, no scrape of the bar being lifted. One breath, the doorway was empty air and shadow. The next, he was simply there, standing among us the way the sun stands in the sky, not sneaking into a room, but simply being present, as though walls had never been an obstacle to him at all. Peace be with you. His voice. I would have known it in the dark, in 1,000 voices, at the end of the world. Every hair on my arms rose. My mouth went dry as the wilderness. Every argument I had built in 7 days of guarding my heart came apart in an instant, the way a well-built wall still falls if the ground beneath it moves. And then he turned. He turned to me, not to the room, to me, and I understood with a lurch of my whole body that he had heard every word I said 8 days before, though I had said it to Peter and John and not to him. He had not been in the room, and he had heard. "Put your finger here and see my hands," he said, and he held them out to me, turning his palms upward into the lamplight so that I could see. "Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." I did not move for a moment. I could see the wound in his hand from where I sat. Torn, healed, unmistakably real, the mark a nail leaves in flesh and not in a story someone tells you. I thought of my own words, thrown out like a challenge to God himself. Unless I put my finger into the mark of the nails, I will not believe. He had not been angry when he said it back to me. There was no scorn in his voice, no triumph at having caught me in my stubbornness. Only an invitation, gentle as a father's hand held out to a child, still afraid to cross a dark room. I got up. My legs did not feel entirely my own. I crossed the space between us. 3 steps, 4, the shortest and longest walk of my life, and I looked at his hand, and I did not put my finger into it after all. I did not need to anymore. Seeing him standing there, alive, whole, speaking my own secret words back to me with such tenderness that I could hardly breathe, that was enough. More than enough. The proof I had demanded became suddenly unnecessary. The instant mercy stood in front of me instead of an argument. I went down on my knees. The stone floor was cold and hard against them, and I did not feel it at all. My Lord and my God. I said it the way a drowning man says the word for sure. Not as a title I had reasoned my way toward, but as the whole truth of him breaking over me at once. Not merely my teacher raised from death, but the Lord God himself, who had walked beside me for 3 years wearing the face of a friend, who had eaten bread with me and washed my feet and let me call him Rabbi as though he were an equal, and who had let me see, at last, that he had been so much more than that the entire time. He looked down at me. I remember the weight of his gaze, not heavy with judgment, but full, the way a lamp is full of light. And he said, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." I have carried those words every day since, and I will carry them until I die. They were not a rebuke. I have heard men use them as one, as though Christ were scolding me for my slowness. He was not. He was looking past me, past that room, down through years I could not yet see, to men and women who would never touch his hands, never hear his voice with their own ears, never stand where I stood that evening. And he was calling them blessed, blessed above me, in a way. I needed to see the wounds. I could not help what I was. Grief had built a wall in me that only his own hand could tear down, and he tore it down not with anger, but with mercy, meeting me exactly where my unbelief stood and calling me forward from there. That is the mercy I have never gotten over. He did not wait for me to climb out of my doubt on my own strength before he would come near me. He came into the room where I already was, bolted door and all, and held out his wounded hands to the one man among them who had said he wouldn't believe without proof. He did not need to. He chose to. That is who he is. I spent the rest of my life carrying that name he gave me leave to speak aloud, my Lord and my God, into places far from that upper room. Scripture does not record where the road took me after Pentecost, but I have heard it said I carried the gospel east, beyond Persia, into India, among strangers who had never heard the name of Israel's God, let alone his Messiah. I like to think that is true. It would be a fitting mercy, wouldn't it, that the disciple who doubted loudest became the one who walked furthest to tell others what he'd finally seen. I do not tell you my story so that you will think less of doubt or pretend you have never stood where I stood, arms crossed against a joy you were afraid to trust. I tell you because of what he said before I even reached him. You may never press your finger into his hands the way I did. You do not need to. The blessing was never reserved for the man who touched the wounds. It was spoken over you, whoever you are, reading this now with your own unanswered questions folded quietly in your chest, over everyone who has not seen and yet believes. He is not offended by your honest doubt. He meets it. He always has. Bring him your locked door and your unbelief exactly as they are, and watch what he does with both.